as a small child. The wheat was beautiful.
Huge fields of it, I bet. So then how did you end up in Murdo?
Oh, that's a whole story.
Well, okay, why don't we go ahead and you can start telling whatever it is that you kind of had thought about to the youngsters here, and then if we have time, maybe you could tell us a story about how you ended up coming from Montana.
Do you want me to start?
Dave says you're going first, so.
I think I better stand up.
Okay, Mandy, so you're filming?
Yep.
Okay.
Reminds me of grade school. I loved grade school. We walked, this was in Montana. Dagmar, Montana was a community that was named after a Danish queen, Queen Dagmar. And so we were, my brothers and I, we were proud of being sort of from Denmark. In 1928, my parents had taken the three of us, I have two brothers, and took us to Denmark. We went on board ship, and that's a whole story in itself. And visited while my grandfather, my dad's father, was still alive. He wanted to see his American grandchildren. And so that was another whole story. It was fantastic. And so much, I was 5 at the time, I think. Yeah, it was just before I started grade school. And so many memories and such a wonderful time. Denmark is truly beautiful, and I have been there twice since to visit cousins. By the way, my cousins in Denmark are very aware of what's going on in the United States. I don't know if that's other countries that really look to the United States and keep up with they'd say, who are you going to vote for president? And they were always very interested in what was going on in the United States. So the trips to Denmark have been wonderful. I'll go back to grade school. We walked to school. This was in 1928 when I started school, the fall of 1928. And we had still had very good crops up until then. So good, in fact, that my dad bought a new Chevrolet car. It was green. And in later years, neighbors said, well, it's a good thing you bought a green car. That was the only thing green that we had to look at for many years, because it seemed like the year of 1929 went to a different story altogether. We didn't have a crop, and gardens were failures too. It was starting to dry up, but the actual storms, dust storms, didn't start until 1930, as I remember. I don't know if they did here.
30, 31.
30 and 31, yeah. And that was a different story. And to see the dust just picking up, we wondered, where did it come from? And it was awful to get out in a dust storm. But my parents, they didn't baby us. We walked a mile to school every day. We headed west in the morning, and that was kind of against the wind. So it was always a sigh of relief when we walked home, because we had the wind on our back. And the dust storms were bad. And I don't remember when we first got the grasshoppers.
We had grasshoppers in 31.
In 31. Yeah, we probably must have too, because they were there for many years. I can remember one day my dad thought, oh, there's going to be rain. It was in the west, it was a big, kind of a gray cloud. And he didn't know for sure if that was a rain cloud. Well, it turned out to be grasshoppers. They moved in a big cloud, and we could see them. I could just remember seeing them coming down where there was something green. And they would, like in the garden, the whole army of grasshoppers would soon have that just devastated. And so there wasn't much left for the farmers after the grasshoppers had come through. I can remember grasshoppers even chewing on the clothes that we hung on the clothesline and eating holes in. And then there were crickets that would move in. They didn't come as fast as the grasshoppers did.
Couldn't fly.
Yeah, well, yeah, they couldn't fly, but they sure found what they wanted to eat. They were harder than the grasshoppers even on clothing and everything that they could chew on. And they were very destructible. And we walked every day. My parents didn't baby us. We walked to school every day, and we did have snow in the winter, but it seemed like it wasn't the kind of snow that did the earth any good. And but we walked to school. I think in those years, the farmers, when it got cold, they would, of course, then we traveled with team and sled to school. And the farmers would take their tires off the cars and put them in the basement. Did you do that?
No, no, I
And,
didn't know
no.
basement.
Then my dad had a very serviceable basement, but put the tires in the basement so they wouldn't freeze and crack. And then the rest of the car was put up on blocks in the garage. And that was sled and team. That was wonderful. I can remember getting excited. If my dad was going to take us to school, we could hear the harness before we saw him. But most of the time, they let us walk that mile to school, and we were bundled up. My mother had knit scarves that went around our faces twice, because we always faced the wind when we started in the morning to school. And it was a mile, and somehow we managed. One day, my mother tells me that my dad had looked at the thermometer, and it said 30 degrees below zero. And that was too much. He went out and hitched up the team and went to catch up with us and took us to school. And oh, I can still remember the sound of that harness, the team coming to pick us up, because it was bitterly cold. And
Did you ever get to stay home if it was too cold?
not unless it was a blinding snowstorm.
Really?
No, we did brave
Think
some.
about that, you guys, when we get
Terrible.
days off from school. They had to go
No
in and they had to
snow days.
walk.
Yeah, we didn't have snow days.
No snow days.
No.
Wow.
But we did, as I think back, have a wonderful childhood, even though I think that toughened us for whatever we had to cope with later on. But I remember my parents, they weren't going to take us everywhere and baby us. We learned we had to do it ourselves. And I could tell a lot more stories. I can remember once Well, actually, I didn't know this until afterwards. We walked to school in dust storms and blinding, you couldn't see too far ahead. And we always had faced wind when we went in the morning. Coming home, it was such a relief we could blow all the way home. The wind would help us keep going. I remember one of the first days we had this awful wind and dust. And I happened to look up and I saw some ducks were flying, trying to fly south. And it was so, visibility was so bad that these ducks flew into the telephone wire. And one of the ducks got his wing sheared off, and pretty soon the duck fell and then his wing. And it just about made me cry. I thought, oh, that is awful. They couldn't see where they were going, and that has always stayed with me. And Mother tells me, or used to tell me about how she thought, oh, they'll get lost, that blinding dust storm. And one day she decided she was going to go out to meet us. We did have a fence line we could follow, so we really couldn't go wrong. But she just felt that, oh, maybe what if we didn't make it? And she got a ways out the road, and then she could hear us singing. I think we had learned a new song in music, and she heard us sing. So she hurried and went home. So I never knew that until someone told me about it later, that she had walked out to meet us because she was that concerned. It was scary. And the dust, of course, was blown level in the ditches. There weren't ditches. You didn't have to worry about going into the ditch because they were all filled. And it was so that our house, a lot of the farmers that had houses that were not too well insulated. They were built, my dad built it himself, and of course, as much as he knew that he needed to have it tight from the wind, still, when we were eating, we could see the dust settling on the plate. But we ate it anyway.
You didn't mind a little
We-
dust, huh?
no, my dad said, oh, a little dust won't hurt you. Just eat it with a good spirit and it'll work. And I better let somebody else talk. I could go on.
Okay, well, maybe we'll get a chance to come back and hear some more stories from you, okay? Mr. Moore?
I'm Dave Moore, and I'm not very far from home. I live in Vivian, and I live 2 miles from where I was born. I was born at home, had an old country doctor, Dr. Newman, comes when I was born, and the neighbors, my mom's neighbors come and help. I started the school in 1931. I was 6 years old. I didn't go to kindergarten. We didn't have it. I went to a one-room school, and there was probably from 10 to 12 kids, grades 1 through 8. And our teacher was about, I had 2 teachers in 7 years. I went through grade 1 through 7, and about 15 miles north of Vivian. And that teacher was about 5'3" or 4" and weighed probably 120 pounds, but that could put the biggest kid in school down. She ruled with an iron fist. Never did have any violence or anything. She just had a way about it. When I started school, I rode 2.5 miles horseback to school. I had a different direction than she did. I had the wind at my back in the morning, and at night we faced into it. The first year I went by myself. I remember my dad come and get me in a storm once, He had a team and a little bobsled about that long and about that wide. I hung on, he had a sheepskin coat, and I hung on to his sheepskin coat so I wouldn't fall off the sled, and he took me back home. But we had an old saddle mare that was as trustworthy as you could ask. We never had a bridle. We just rode her with a halter, no saddle. We rode her bareback, and we could soak up a little bit of warmth from the horse. And she knew where home was. She'd get us home regardless of what. My dad's brother, my grandpa Moore died when I was 6. And my dad's younger brother was only like 6 years older than I was. He come and stayed with us after his dad died. He rode this old saddle mare to Kennebec. From 15 miles north of Vivian, he rode her to Kennebec, turned her loose, and in 2 days she was back home.
Did he just do that to see if she could find her way home?
No, we had a storm, a snowstorm, and he couldn't get the car to come back home. His mother lived in Kennebec, so he just turned her loose, and it took her a couple of days, but she got her back home.
Wow, she really knew the way.
The dust storms come, she pretty well told what the dust storms were like, but the grasshoppers came at the same time. You see a few little yellow grasshoppers. We had big yellow ones, and lots of them. When I remember going to the neighbors with my dad, when they had a black tar paper shack, had black tar paper and lath on it, and on the shady side of that tar paper shack, the grasshoppers were just as thick as they could get, just covered. And if you'd left a pitchfork in the hayfield on the shady side of the pitchfork handle, or the shady side of wooden posts, and get just covered with them. And in the spring, when they moved in, you could see them going in the sky like big bunches of birds. The sun would reflect off their wings. They had silver-colored wings. And you could go out and catch them just right when they were moving in. And then also, when I was in high school, we lived on the reservation north of Kennebec. We had crickets, Mormon crickets. They could not fly, but they could crawl, and they were like this size. They just crawled on the ground. And Marie told about the grasshoppers would eat clothes, eat the holes in the clothes off the clothes. My grandpa Moore had bursted appendix in 1931, and in those days, bursted appendix was just fatal. And I remember my folks borrowed the neighbor's car, and they took us to Chamberlain to see my grandpa for the last time. I remember going in there in the hospital room, and he said, "When you boys come to Kennebec, your grandpa won't be there anymore." I can still remember that. The grasshoppers would move in and just take everything. When my folks went to Chamberlain to see my grandpa, the neighbor that used to work for my dad come in to milk the cows and do the chores, and we had corn that probably like 2 or 3 feet high. We were gone, I suppose, a couple of days. When we come home, the cornfield was about this high, no leaves, just the stubs. But right after we left, the grasshoppers moved in, and they ate the corn, just completely ate it up. I was the oldest of 5 in the family. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And my mom had poor health. When Jack, my brother was next to me, them and I were about 1.5 years apart. Then there was a space of 5 or 6 years, and we had I had two sisters and a brother. They were affectionately lumped as the little kids, my mom used to call them. But they were one side, and Jack and I were the other side. I remember my mom saying to me, this, I was 10, and Terry was a year old. And my mom said, Dave, you'll have to help take care of the little kids. So I learned to take care of Terry. I remember I used to bring him and lay him on the floor by the downpour. My mom's knees had swelled up like this big around. She couldn't walk. She'd lay on the downpour and she taught me how to change his pants and take care of him. And I knew how to butter the bread when I come home from school. We always put butter on the crust on the homemade bread so it didn't get too hard. And cottage cheese, the kids buy it in a plastic bowl, and I didn't know how to make cottage cheese from a bucket of sour milk. We had left the milk set on the porch until it turned to cheese. Take a dish towel and make a sack out of it, tie it on a hook up in the ceiling, let the whey drip back in the milk bucket. And then what was left was mixed up in a bowl, and we had syrup. We ate syrup on our cheese.
Maple syrup on your cottage cheese?
You know, cottage
Chokecherry
cheese, I
syrup.
still to this day.
Chokecherry syrup.
We had
Yum.
chokecherry syrup on it.
No, we just had usually maple syrup. And they would
Oh.
And what did you do with the whey, Dave?
just had dogs. My
Fed
dad
it to
always had
hogs.
dogs.
Okay,
Well, nothing went to waste.
yeah. Wow, I bet.
In the dust storms, the fence row used to get plugged with Russian thistle, which is pretty much like fireweed is now. They got about 3 feet, and they'd just 3 feet in diameter. And they'd just roll across the prairie, and when the wind blew, and they'd blow into the fence row, and then the dirt would pile up in the fence row, and it's just like snow almost.
Well, so were the Russian thistles, were they real pokey then? Like the,
No, they
They
were
weren't
pretty,
then.
just weed, like,
okay,
fireweeds almost like them, only they're getting a little taller. They didn't get very tall, but they was big around. And
Okay.
when they dried out in the fall of the year, then they'd blow loose and blow into the fence line.
well, we're gonna have a little break here and have some treats,
Okay?
and then